Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from Fox News. This is dated August 4th. It says, New York Times erroneous cover of Gazan child joins series of media blunders framing stories against Israel. The subheadline says, numerous errors by news outlets appear to all go in one direction, which isn't that the same as it's always been, or at least for the last 10 years. So I'm bringing this up now. I know it's been a few days since this came out, but this is when I'm getting time to record this. But if you didn't know, the New York Times put out this photo down here, as I scroll down right here, as their cover photo, saying that there was a starvation in Gaza, except there was a severe problem with this, that it just, number one, the whole starvation thing is not true. And number two is that, as it says here, is that this child here had pre-existing health problems. I think it was cystic fibrosis, but I'm sure this article is going to go into it. And also, his mom looks rather healthy, so people just ignore that completely. But let's go into the article. It says, the New York Times recently attempted to downplay a significant error that was plastered on its front page. But when it comes to the legacy media's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, the Gray Lady is in good company. Yes, because everything must be anti-Israel and pro-a-terrorist group, such as Hamas. It says, last month, the Times ran the somber headline, Young, Old, and Sick Starve to Death in Gaza. There is nothing, which is the fault of Hamas. It's not the fault of Israel. As accompanying it was a grim image of a malnourished infant and his mother. The caption read, Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, about 18 months with his mother, Hedaya al-Mutawak, who said he was born healthy but was recently diagnosed with severe malnutrition. A doctor said the number of children dying of malnutrition in Gaza has risen sharply. So they're just going to believe what Hamas tells them. Basically, it's the trust me bro thing, you know. It says, critics quickly called out the Times for prominently featuring Mohammed, whose image was featured by numerous other media outlets without mentioning that he has a genetic disorder. So, the New York Times lied, and here's the actual picture of it here. So, let's go down. It says, this article has been updated to include information about Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, a child in Gaza suffering from severe malnutrition. After publication of the article, the Times learned from his doctor that Mohammed also had pre-existing health problems, the editor's note said. So still not being completely honest here, because they're leaving in the whole first part where it says, suffering from severe malnutrition, which just is not the case. And if he is, again, look, his mother looks rather healthy. And if you see the actual picture, like, there's another child there as well who looks totally fine. Okay, and like, you wouldn't think that kid was starving if you saw that kid by himself. But if this one child was starving, if he really was, why was the mom doing that to him with the other kid totally fine? Kind of weird, huh? It says, a spokesperson for the Times released a statement saying, children in Gaza are malnourished and starving, which isn't true. It says, as New York Times reporters and others have documented. Basically, it's only people that side with Hamas have documented this. Nobody else has. It says, we recently ran a story about Gaza's most vulnerable civilians, including Mohammed Zakaria al-Mutawak, who is about 18 months old and suffers from severe malnutrition. We have since learned new information, including from the hospital that treated him and his medical records, and have updated our story to add context about his pre-existing health problems. This additional detail gives readers a greater understanding of his situation. So the problem is that he has the pre-existing health problems, not that he's malnourished, because he's not. Okay? It says, our reporters and photographers continue to report from Gaza, bravely, sensitively, and at personal risk, so that readers can see firsthand the consequences of the war, the statement added. And like the article said, though, it always seems to go in one direction, that they always seem to be reporting against Israel. Funny how that works. It says, notably, that statement was shared by the Times Communications account, which has less than 90,000 followers on X, and not the Times main account, which has more than 55 million followers. So it was like, yeah, we're going to admit to an error, not entirely admitting to it, but we're going to put it on, like, essentially a burner account as opposed to, like, our main account where everybody would be able to see it. So, dick move by the New York Times there. This says, the Times wasn't alone. Outlets across the globe, including the BBC and NPR, similarly promoted such images without the context of the child's genetic disorder. And again, I think it hasn't said it yet, and maybe it won't now that we've gotten this far into it, but I think the kid had cystic fibrosis, which is why he looked the way that he did. And like I said, there's another child there that mom has in that photo, and he looks totally fine. It says, ever since Hamas carried out its gruesome terrorist attack against Israel on October 7, 2023, news organizations have largely framed the war. Why did it just skip there? Go back up. It says, largely framed the war as the Jewish state carrying out a disproportionate military response and being responsible for the suffering among civilians in Gaza. And in doing so, several reports were walked back for various errors that all side against Israel and for the benefit of the Palestinian cause. Yeah, funny how that works. Maybe the reporting on this from the mainstream media is totally biased, and you just shouldn't pay attention to it. It says, within days of October 7th, the Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry claimed that Israel bombed Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital through an airstrike that resulted in over 500 civilian casualties. I remember that, and then it came out, as it's probably going to say here, it came out right pretty much like within a day or two that, oh wait, they killed each other. It was not Israel doing it at all. Subsequent reporting and intelligence found that there was an explosion in the hospital's parking lot stemming from a misfired rocket fired by Hamas ally Islamic Jihad, resulting in a death toll, a tiny fraction of what Hamas had first alleged. Yeah, it was like 50 people. So they killed each other. Then you had morons like Rashida Tlaib out there saying, like, oh, look what Israel's doing. Nope, she lied too. Israel didn't do anything, and did she ever apologize for it? Nope. It says the New York Times published the headline, Israeli strike kills hundreds in hospital, Palestinians say. And anytime you see Palestinians say, I think I've said this on other videos before, like, if anybody has ever known a compulsive liar in their life, just to kind of ignore whatever they tell you. Just kind of be like, yeah, sure. Palestinian society is the societal version of a compulsive liar. Everything they say should be taken with the largest grain of salt possible to make. Even God has a problem thinking up a grain of salt that large, okay? You should just assume they're lying, because in all likelihood, they are. Okay, so this shouldn't even say like a Palestinian say. It should just be like, this is bullshit. Sorry, we screwed up. It says the paper later admitted it relied too heavily on claims by Hamas, you don't say, and did not make clear that those claims could not be immediately verified. So CNN similarly pushed the narrative, running the headline, Israel hits hospital and school in Gaza as blockade puts healthcare system in state of collapse. The headline was later changed to hundreds likely dead in hospital blast as Israeli blockade cripples medical response. CNN 2 issued a correction. And even that, when they changed the headline, that still wasn't accurate. It was, we fired on ourselves and killed each other. The end. Israel had nothing to do with this. Said this article on the Gaza hospital blast initially did not clearly attribute claims about Israel's responsibility to the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. CNN's correction read, I do like there, however, as much as I'm not really liking some of their apology already, I do like how they said that the Ministry of Health is run by Hamas, okay, because it's a key point that nobody seems to mention. So it says, Israel later said a misfired rocket by a militant group, Islamic Jihad, caused the blast and produced evidence to support its claim. U.S. President Joe Biden said the Israeli position is backed by U.S. intelligence. CNN's forensic analysis of images and videos suggests a rocket fired from within Gaza caused the blast, not an Israeli airstrike. Okay, so it ended up pretty well. That's a decent apology. Says, as documented by journalist Drew Holden, a slew of news outlets fell for Hamas's falsehood, including the Associated Press, who, remember, had offices in Gaza, Reuters, who is not good either, CBS News, The Washington Post, MSNBC, Politico, Axios, and the BBC. Some never issued corrections, and I doubt they're ever going to, but it's all the usual suspects, right? So the Washington Post had a similar front-page blunder in July 2024 in its coverage of the Israel-Hezbollah escalation that occurred at the time. So the Iran-backed terrorist group in Lebanon launched its deadliest assault against Israel since the October 7th attack on the northern town of Majd al-Shams in the Golan Heights, resulting in at least 12 dead and dozens injured, all of them children and teens who were playing on a soccer field. Yeah, that's awful. Says the Post cover featured a large image of Israelis mourning the death of 11-year-old Alma Ayman Fakir al-Din. However, underneath the image, the Post ran the headline, Israel hits targets in Lebanon, referring to Israel's retaliatory strikes against Hezbollah. So there's the picture there. Says after sparking outrage on social media, the Post issued an editor's note. So let's see how this goes. Says the headline and subheadline that accompanied a July 29th page 1 photo and article about Israeli strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon did not provide adequate context. The headline should have noted that the Israeli strikes were a response to a rocket strike from Lebanon that killed 12 teenagers and children in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. The photo depicted mourning for one of the victims, and as the caption noted, Post editors wrote. In January, the Post quietly edited a report after it was asked about its citation of a pro-Palestinian group that the United States government had designated a sham charity for a terrorist organization. The Democracy Dies in Darkness paper published a story about the Palestinians who were released from Israeli custody as part of the hostage agreement made with Hamas. And it says, according to Samadoun, who I've done videos on before, they are a terrorist-associated group. It says it's an activist network supporting Palestinian prisoners. It's worse than that. It says the group includes journalists, activists, teachers, students, and close relatives of high-profile Hamas figures, the Post wrote, including a link to a Samadoun article published earlier in the week. Samadoun, however, was singled out by the Biden administration last October as being financially linked, here you go, to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, which has been designated as a terrorist organization by numerous countries, including the U.S. and the European Union. The Post article had referred to the PFLP as a small leftist armed group. Nope, they are an actual designated terrorist organization, so how about that? It says organizations like Samadoun masquerade as charitable actors that claim to provide humanitarian support to those in need, yet, in reality, divert funds from much-needed assistance to support terrorist groups, said Bradley T. Smith, the then acting Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. The United States, together with Canada and our like-minded partners, will continue to disrupt those who seek to finance the PFLP, Hamas, and other terrorist organizations. Among the prisoners released and reported on the article was Khalida Jarrar, a PFLP member accused by Israel of supporting terrorism. It says Fox News Digital inquired about the Washington Post citation in January. After an exchange with a spokesperson about a deadline for an official response regarding the newspaper's language, the Washington Post updated and added a clarification into the story without informing Fox News Digital. Wonderful. It says, those released include journalists, activists, teachers, students, and close relatives of high-profile Hamas figures. According to Samadoun, a group supporting Palestinian prisoners that the United States says is a fundraiser for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is under U.S. sanctions, the report now reads. As the clarification at the bottom of the report states, a previous version of this article referred to Samadoun as an activist network that supports Palestinian prisoners. However, it failed to note that the United States says the group is an international fundraiser for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which Washington has placed under sanctions. So again, they're always leaving out some detail that reframes everything. It says in February, the BBC aired a documentary called Gaza, How to Survive a War. I remember this, and it was full of BS. It says featuring narration from a 13-year-old boy named Abdullah, but the film failed to disclose that Abdullah was the son of senior Hamas official Ayman al-Yazawri. It says the BBC pulled the documentary from its online streaming platform just 5 days after it was aired and issued an apology. Like, how did it even get that far that it even aired? If you knew this was going to be completely biased. Okay. Since the transmission of our documentary on Gaza, the BBC has become aware of the family connections of the film's narrator, a child called Abdullah. We promised our audiences the highest standards of transparency, so it is only right that as a result of this new information, we add some more detail to the film before its retransmission. We apologize for the omission of that detail from the original film, the BBC said in a statement at that time. Yeah, I don't think they cared. So it says an internal review concluded last what? Just says concluded last. I think they missed something there. So it says an internal review concluded last sometime or other found that the BBC was unaware of Abdullah's lineage prior to the documentary's broadcast, but 3 members of the production company, Hoyo Films, did know that the boy's father was a Hamas official. So this is called propaganda. So it says the Probe, however, criticized the broadcaster for not being sufficiently proactive with its due diligence ahead of the broadcast, which they absolutely deserve that criticism, and admonished it for a lack of critical oversight of unanswered or partially answered questions regarding the documentary ahead of the broadcast. It claimed that the use of the Hamas-linked narrator did not influence the content of the film, which is total bullshit, but said the inclusion of the boy was not appropriate. Jeez. We are owning where we have made mistakes, finding out what went wrong, acting on the findings, and we've said we're sorry, BBC News CEO Deborah Turnus told the BBC's Radio 4. That the BBC vowed to take steps to address the failure, including issuing new guidance on the use of narrators in documentaries centering on controversial topics, the creation of a new leadership role focusing on documentaries, and a new review process that ensures that no high-risk, long-form programs can be formally commissioned until all potential compliance considerations are considered and listed. Leading to another media fiasco in May, United Nations humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher offered a dire warning to the world about the health crisis in Gaza as truckloads of aid were being stalled. He said, "Let me describe what is on those trucks. This is baby food, baby nutrition. There are 14,000 babies that will die in the next 48 hours unless we can reach them," Fletcher told BBC's Radio 4. "This is not food that Hamas are going to steal." Too bad, like everybody else, he was completely wrong and also lied. Does that claim spread quickly spread like wildfire? NBC News posted on X, around 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours if many more aid trucks do not reach Gaza. And where do they come up with that 14,000 number anyway? It says the UN's humanitarian chief says the claim was repeated on MSNBC by NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley, telling anchor Anna Cabrera that 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours if the status quo in terms of humanitarian aid persists. It says the UN warning that as many as 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours, Israel blocking all food and medicines now for nearly 3 months, saying it's trying to pressure Hamas to release hostages, including, of course, the 4 Americans believed to be dead. ABC News chief foreign correspondent Ian Pannell told Good Morning America co-host Robin Robertson, explain to me this. Why did someone on this side that I'm reading here that's saying this stuff should have to explain why Israel is required to feed the people that they're at war with? And if you look this up, they are quite literally the first country in the history of warfare that's had to do this. Okay, so I don't know why they're being expected to do it, but well, I guess we hold Israel to a different standard. It says the urgent warnings tonight about the humanitarian crisis worsening in Gaza. The UN now warning 14,000 babies could die within 48 hours. ABC's David Moyer teased viewers on World News Tonight before turning to panel. A UN spokesperson went on to clarify that 14,000 babies were actually at risk of suffering severe acute malnutrition if aid wasn't brought to Gazans, not of death, as Fletcher asserted. Yeah, those are two completely different things, and I guess I'd believe the UN before I'd believe the mainstream media, but even the UN is, to me, not a credible source. So the BBC, NBC News, and ABC News later issued clarifications. So you can see how everything is going against Israel and nothing anybody's saying about Israel is actually correct. It says in June, when Israel carried out targeted strikes against top Iranian military generals and nuclear scientists in Tehran, New York Times UN Bureau Chief Farnaz Fasihi shared images of the aftermath, suggesting the attacks were random. As a friend in Tehran sent me this video, apartment complex housing university professors attacked directly across the street from her house, Fasihi wrote. The randomness of strikes in residential neighborhoods have terrified Iranians. No, trust me, if it's Israel doing that, it ain't random. It said critics railed against Fasihi as Israeli forces issued such remarkable precision to prevent mass civilian casualties, as they do. As a Times journalist was forced to clarify her comment. It says, about my tweet yesterday, I meant to say the source of the sense of randomness caused by the strikes in residential neighborhoods has terrified Iranians. As we reported, Israel has said the strikes are targeted, Fasihi said. Well, I'm glad you came to the truth there, lady. But as you can see, and as I've said, that this is all BS, okay? Anything you hear coming from the Palestinian side or anything, the Gaza Health Ministry should be treated as a lie until it's proven by them to be true, okay? And if Israel comes out and, as they've always done, and said this is not a thing that happened, then, you know what? Maybe you keep believing the wrong side if you're one of those pro-Palestinian folks, okay? You've been lied to, you've been hoodwinked, you've been bamboozled, and maybe you're just gullible. But that's all I have to say about this, because this video is going on long enough. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.